The weather for Leicestershire Rutland today, it'll start off dry. Most places will see some sunny spells, but clouds going to build.
Colleagues, welcome, good morning. Welcome to the University of Leicester. I'm Richard Taylor, Deputy Registrar here. Just a brief word about what's going to happen over the next hour or so. The press conference will start as close to 10 as we can possibly make it. You can see there's a series of presentations. We think it's important that you hear all of the evidence so that you can understand the conclusion that my academic colleagues have reached. So do bear with us as we go through some of the detail. Following the conclusion of the press conference, my colleagues from the University of Leicester will stay here at the front and will be available for media interviews. Colleagues from the Richard III Society will be available through in the ante-room. Colleagues here from Leicester City Council as well. There will be an opportunity for journalists to bear witness to the remains later this morning, but recording equipment and cameras will not be allowed in the room, and that's because we're following the English Heritage Guidelines for good care of human remains.
Well, my name is Bob Burgess and I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Leicester, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all here today. We're gathered here in order to tell a research story. A research story, like other research stories, that becomes a research adventure. And that's why people in higher education are into the business of doing research. The researchers now need to come to discuss what has happened during the course of the research, what the key issues are, and of course, what the findings are. And for that, we all wait to hear what only the researchers can tell us. Namely, is it that the University of Leicester has discovered the remains of Richard III or not?
Today, we bear witness to history. We peer 500 years into medieval times and literally reach into a grave. All that you will hear from my colleagues will be published in leading academic peer-reviewed journals such as Antiquity. What we're about to tell you is truly astonishing. In August 1485, King Richard of England rode out from Leicester to face Henry Tudor at Bosworth. Defeated and killed, his body was brought back to the city, slung over a pack horse. Following the dissolution of the monasteries, the trail goes cold, although the historical record has the rough site of Richard's grave marked as late as 1612. But popular local legend has it that Richard's remains were thrown into the River Soar by an angry mob at the dissolution of the monasteries and lost forever. In what is amongst the best archaeological world this country has seen, a team of archaeologists and scientists from the University of Leicester has led the search for Richard III, and I now invite them to present their evidence.
The local historian David Baldwin, a tutor at the University of Leicester, who I'm pleased to say is here with us today, writing over 25 years ago, believed that the king's remains still lay in the precinct of the Greyfriars, and said, "It is possible, though perhaps now unlikely, that at some time in the 21st century, an excavator may yet reveal the slight remains of this famous monarch." The location of the Greyfriars precinct has never really been lost. The team on site, under the direction of Matthew Morris, started machining the first trench on the 25th of August 2012 and discovered evidence for an articulated burial almost immediately in the first 5 metres of the trench. Now we were confident that the burial found in the first trench lay somewhere inside the church. Exhumation of the individual by Joe Appleby commenced. On the same day, at a site meeting with the university's expert on urban friaries, Deirdre O'Sullivan, and an external specialist, Dr. Glyn Kopak, it was agreed that we had found the junction of the choir and presbytery, the area in front of the high altar. This, of course, meant that the burial under excavation, skeleton 1, almost certainly lay in the western part of the choir, just in front of the choir stalls, and was therefore a prime candidate to be Richard III. Within minutes of this decision, before the site meeting finished, came the revelation via Matthew Morris that the burial exhibited certain interesting characteristics, in particular, curvature of the spine and evidence of trauma to the skull. I can now show the grave and method of interment in a bit more detail. This is the empty grave pit. The grave lay in an area of the first trench where a modern disturbance had destroyed most of the later medieval floor levels, and where a 19th century brick outhouse had come very close to destroying the burial altogether. The next slide that I'm going to show you is a world first, an image of the in situ remains discovered by University of Leicester archaeologists in the choir of the Greyfriars church and excavated on Wednesday, the 5th of September 2012. It was an extraordinary discovery that stunned all of us and has led to the 5-month scientific and archaeological investigation culminating in this announcement today. The skeleton was in good condition, and apart from the hands and sternum, remained in articulation. The feet were missing, almost certainly as a result of later disturbance. And, of course, the evidence for scoliosis or curvature of the spine could be plainly seen. There was no evidence for a coffin in the form of nails or impressions in the soil, or for a shroud, which might be expected to leave the bones in a rather more compact position. There was no evidence for clothing, objects of personal adornment, or other goods in the grave. There were other unusual aspects to the interment. Whilst the lower limbs were fully extended, suggesting they were laid in the grave first, the torso was twisted, and unusually the head was propped upright against the northwest corner of the grave, much higher than the rest of the skeleton, with the mandible open. The lower left arm was flexed across the abdomen, whilst the right arm was slightly flexed beside the torso, the hands crossing, right over left, at the hip. This raises the interesting possibility that the hands of the Greyfriars individual were tied at the wrists at the time of interment, although this is impossible to prove through scientific study, as bindings would have decayed and would not leave any trace on the skeleton. Now, one of the first pieces of scientific analysis that we applied to the skeletal remains was radiocarbon dating, in the hope that this would provide confirmation that the individual died in the late 15th century, thereby ruling out the possibility that it was a much earlier burial. The results provide a model date of 1455 to 1540.
In carrying out the skeletal analysis of the Greyfriars skeleton, we had to answer 3 main questions. Firstly, did this skeleton fit with the known facts about Richard III, his age, sex, and physical appearance? Secondly, what was the nature of the scoliosis, and could we tell anything about how it had affected him in life? And thirdly, what could we tell about the wounds we had identified, and were there any more? The analysis of the skeleton proved that it was an adult male, but with an unusually slender, almost feminine build for a man. This is in keeping with historical sources, which describe Richard as being of very slender build. There is, however, no indication that he had a withered arm. Both arms were of a similar size, and both were used normally during life. The skeleton is that of an individual aged between the late 20s and late 30s. We know that Richard III was 32 when he died, and this is entirely consistent with the Greyfriars skeleton. The analysis of the scoliosis took place together with Professor Bruno Morgan of the University of Leicester and Dr. Piers Mitchell of the University of Cambridge. This showed that the Greyfriars skeleton had a condition known as idiopathic adolescent onset scoliosis. The word idiopathic is a complicated medical term for a simple fact, the cause of the scoliosis is unclear. In our press conference in September, we discussed 2 possible wounds on the skeleton. We have now identified 10 wounds. 8 of these are on the skull, whilst 2 are elsewhere on the body. All of the wounds have characteristics that identify them as perimortem, i.e. occurring at or shortly after the time of death. They could not have been inflicted after the burial of this individual, and none could have been caused by damage during excavation. In September, we said that we had identified a small penetrating wound on the top of the head, and you can see that here. Analysis suggests that this was caused by a direct blow from a weapon rather than by a projectile such as an arrowhead. This injury would not have been fatal. The second wound that we discussed in September was a large wound to the base of the skull at the back, and you can see that wound here. We said that this might represent a slice cut off the skull by a bladed weapon. Our work has now shown that this is indeed the case. A smaller injury, also on the base of the skull, was caused by a bladed weapon which penetrated through to the inner surface of the skull opposite the entry point, a distance of 10.5 centimetres. You can see that second smaller injury here. Both of these injuries would have caused almost instant loss of consciousness, and death would have followed quickly afterwards. A further 3 wounds have been identified on the outer surface of the vault of the skull. These are shallow wounds, highly consistent with where the blade of a weapon such as a sword or halberd has shaved off a small area of bone, and you can clearly see one of these areas here. These wounds would not have been immediately fatal, but could have caused death through blood loss if left untreated for a long period of time. In addition to these, there is a small rectangular injury on the cheekbone, which you can see here. Finally, on the skull, there is a cut mark on the lower jaw. You can just see this at the bottom of the image here. This is caused by a bladed weapon consistent with a knife or dagger. It is hard to understand how any of these injuries could have been caused if this individual had been wearing a protective helmet. We therefore suggest that this may have been lost by this stage in the battle. The injuries to the jaw and cheek are particularly interesting in that they are less severe than attacks to the face seen in other medieval battle victims. This has led us to suggest that they may reflect attacks on the body after death, although we cannot confirm this directly from the bones. The 2 wounds on the postcranial skeleton are also likely to have been inflicted after armour had been removed from the body. This leads us to suggest that they may also represent post-mortem humiliation injuries inflicted on this individual after death. The first of these is a cut mark on a rib, so you can see the mark here, and it's also lifted a small area of bone from the surface of the rib. The second postcranial injury is located on the right pelvis and is highly consistent with being a blade wound from a weapon. During the battle, this area would have been protected by armour, which would have made it difficult for an injury such as this to be inflicted. Historical sources suggest that Richard's naked body was flung over a horse after the Battle of Bosworth before being carried back to Leicester. Whilst we can never be certain of what happened, if so, this would have provided an ideal opportunity for a wound such as this to be inflicted as a symbolic act of humiliation to the body. Taken as a whole, the skeletal evidence provides a highly convincing case for identification as Richard III.
Almost immediately after the discovery of the skeleton, we established that we would wish to conduct DNA analysis, comparing any DNA which might be extracted from the remains to that of living day descendants and relatives. This is where I came in. We quickly identified 3 main tasks. Task 1, identify and contact a group of living male relatives. Task 2, verify and document the maternal line from Anne of York to Michael Ibsen and his siblings Jeff and Leslie, as previously identified through the important work undertaken by John Ashdown Hill. And thirdly, to identify, if possible, a second maternal line descent. In short, we discovered a second maternal line which is critically important in that it allows us to triangulate
the two DNA samples here with that of any skeletal remains. The individual in question that we identified is working very closely with the project and has donated a DNA sample to help in our research. However, they wish to remain totally anonymous, and we fully respect those wishes.
So for me, this project has been a puzzle of two parts. Now, the first part of the puzzle has been the modern DNA side. As you've just heard, I've been working very closely with Professor Kevin Schur, who has carried out a great deal of research on the genealogy side of things. As Professor Schur just explained, it was important to establish a second line of descent to confirm the maternal DNA line. Now, the second part of the puzzle was the ancient DNA analysis, and to see if it was even possible to retrieve ancient DNA from the skeletal remains. There is a DNA match between the maternal DNA from the descendants of the family of Richard III and the skeletal remains that we found at the Greyfriars dig. In short, the DNA evidence points to these being the remains of Richard III.
It falls to me as the lead archaeologist in the search for Richard III to announce the conclusion we have reached at the University of Leicester concerning the identity of the Greyfriars skeleton. It has been an honour and a privilege for all of us to be at the centre of a project that has had such phenomenal global interest and mass public appeal. Rarely have the conclusions of academic research been so eagerly awaited. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the academic conclusion of the University of Leicester that beyond reasonable doubt, the individual exhumed at Greyfriars in September 2012 is indeed Richard III, the last Plantagenet King of England.
I wish to pay tribute to my academic colleagues whose outstanding research has delivered today's announcement. It is a testament to their unparalleled skill in terms of the understanding of the city's heritage that such a groundbreaking discovery is presented to you today. I also wish to pay tribute to our partners, Leicester City Council and to the Richard III Society for the success of this project. In particular, Philippa Langley, from whom you will hear shortly, who captured our interest and compelled us to be part of this exciting project.
Wow. Today marks the culmination of an extraordinary journey of discovery. When I embarked on the Looking for Richard project 4 years ago, the quest to find a king in a car park, everyone thought that I was mad. It's not the easiest pitch in the world to look for a king under a council car park. But luckily for me, the Richard III Society, Leicester City Council, the University of Leicester, and also Channel 4 and Darlow Smithson Productions, partners with vision, came on board.
I want to thank all the organisations and the individuals who've helped turn this unlikely dream into an amazing reality. We do announce today that in accordance with the permissions that were given by the Ministry of Justice, it has been agreed by all concerned that the King's body will be reinterred here in Leicester Cathedral, in whose shadow the remains have laid for the last 500 years.
We're delighted with today's news, and we at the Cathedral and in the diocese feel a huge honour to be part of a city and a community that can reveal such incredible stories as this. As Peter has said, I can now confirm that the Cathedral have received letters from the City Council and from the University to further enact the requirements of the licence which led to the exhumation of these human remains. And following best archaeological practice, human remains are interred as near to their site of discovery as possible. And the licence from the Ministry of Justice specifically names Leicester Cathedral.
I would like to finish by thanking the incredible team on this project who believed in it enough to come with me.
It's been excellent. Everybody's been mutually supportive, and it's been great to have people like Philippa Langley and all her enthusiasm in pushing the project forward. I think without her it would never have happened, so that's been absolutely fantastic.
The partnership with Leicester City Council has been crucial. They were the very first people that I came to in Leicester and pitched the idea to them. And it was an interesting meeting, because they listened and they didn't, sort of throw me out as being a crazy person. But I think what clinched it was I explained that we had Richard III's mitochondrial DNA sequence. And I think at that point they really started taking notice because they knew we were serious then. And they knew that the research behind it was serious.
Well, it's enormously exciting, it really is, because our city is one that has a continuity of history dating back to pre-Roman times. And what we've got here is something that tells one of the most important chapters in that history, tells it with a clarity that we've never had before, but also enables us to take the opportunity to tell the rest of that story and the other important chapters in our history.